Hello and welcome to a new old show. Work that one out, dear listener. My name is Kris, and you might remember me from such shows as The Simpsons. No, you might remember me as being a former host of a podcast called the Football Hipsters. Well, this is kind of the rebirth. We're hoping, anyway. We've decided that at the time of recording this in April 2020, just about nearly in May now, we are in the midst of the global pandemic known as COVID-19 or coronavirus, whichever you prefer. And seeing as everybody is going either back to podcasting or producing more podcasts, we thought, why not get the team back together? Why not have a little chat and just see where these things go? So we've decided to kind of rebrand ourselves a little bit. We're still the Football Hipsters podcast under the sort of nameplate of Let's Talk Football, which is exactly what we're going to do today. So the first thing I'm going to do is introduce my cohorts. First of all, he's been with us since day one, I think. Josh, Mr. Josh Daw, how are you, sir?
I am good, thank you. It's actually not been that long since we've podded last. A couple of days ago, well, probably weeks ago. It feels, you know how this is at the moment. All days have merged into one massive clusterfuck. Let's go.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah, it's all good. It's all good.
Good. Well, nice to have you back on board. And we had to have a view from Spain, of course, as well. So welcome back to Joel. How are you, Joel?
I'm good, mate. I'm glad to be back talking about football. It's been it's interesting. There's lots to talk about with no football being played, isn't it? It's a really weird one. I mean, we've had no football. I can't remember. Is it 6 weeks?
I think it is the 6th week now.
I can't remember the last game I watched. The last game that I watched that sticks in my mind was Liverpool Atletico Madrid. So
I think that was the same for me, actually.
Yeah. So it's a long time ago, but there's lots to discuss. So I'm looking forward to this chat.
Yeah.
Let's see where we're at. Good
stuff. Nice to have you back on board. And we're also welcoming back a former friend. That sounds awful, doesn't it? He's still our friend, but we're welcoming him back. Drew, how are you doing, sir?
Exhausted, but I'm good. Good to see you guys.
You look like a tired man. Have you been very busy?
I woke up probably about 10 minutes before I came on. That's why I needed another 5 minutes.
Hey, that's fine. You got the
it's
coffee on the go.
I don't know. It's weird. Like with this kind of stuff, my anxiety's been kind of through the roof, so I don't go to bed till 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning sometimes.
I feel you on that one. Yeah, I'm completely with you on that one. For those listeners that might be new to the pod, Drew's based in the US, so there's a lot of us in different time zones at the moment. But his specialist subject is very much German football, so that's where we will be going. And last but not least, I've saved the best for last, of course, the lady amongst us. Lana, how are you doing, my dear?
I'm well, thank you. All good, all considering.
Yes. Well, it's with you we're going to start. There's a reason I've left you till last, because before we talk about football, you have unfortunately been a victim of said virus, and you had a tough few weeks, I guess it would be fair to say. Just for our listeners out there, and obviously you can say as much or as little as you want, but how are you feeling now? How did it all come about? And just give a bit of an insight as to how you sort of got through that period of time, because you weren't very well, were you? Bless you, for a while.
No, I wasn't. And victim sounds so horrible.
It does, doesn't it? It does, doesn't it?
I wanted to look positive on it. I was like, yeah, me and Dybala, we have something in common at last. Poor guy. I think he has an even rougher time than I do. But we'll touch on that later. I blame London because I went to London, and I don't know if I got it here and brought it to London or if I got it there, because I think it was my 3rd day that I started to feel really bad. My throat was really dry and it was really hard to swallow. Please don't make any jokes. And then, my joints were hurting and the headache kicked in, the dry eyes, and then, the having issues breathing, feeling like an elephant was sitting on my chest. I have asthma as well. So it was basically everything in one go. It was really hard. I think it was like the 10th day that I really struggled to breathe. So I ended up in the hospital. I was actually going for a walk. It was at night because I was so tired of sitting inside. So I brought my dad with me, with social distance, of course. And we were in the woods when I suddenly had a really bad. I was struggling to breathe, and he was panicking because he was calling the ambulance, trying to explain where we were, while trying to remain calm and actually making sure I wasn't semi choking and dying. So at last, he was able to explain where we were, and I ended up getting admitted to the ICU, and I was there for like 3 days before I got discharged. Uh, and I think on the 18th day, I was much better. I was able to breathe better, but I'm still very tired. I sleep a lot, and now Ramadan has started as well, so I'm fasting. So it's like I'm even more tired while trying to work. So I guess it's that. I eat less as well, less than I already do. So it's been hard. It's been really tough, and I've been struggling mentally a lot. So poor therapist. I've been to him a lot lately, but I'm better now compared to when I came home and the weeks following. So I just want to tell everyone, please stay inside. You don't have to go out and do all the things you feel you need to do. It's just stay inside because you might, there's so many people who are dying around us, and it just annoys me and angers me that people won't listen. Um,
Yeah, a lot of people are not heeding the advice. I think, speaking from a British point of view, there's a lot of people in the UK that are quote unquote getting bored, getting restless. Well, diseases and viruses don't get bored or restless; they don't stop. So, yeah, echo to what you said, Lana. It's really good to have you back with the team, of course, and I'm very glad to know that you're on the mend, and that's really good news to hear. What we will do is, as I say, we're going to kind of run through the leagues a little bit and just talk about the individual countries that we kind of represent, quote unquote. Just to give you a bit of a heads up on what's happened since we last spoke to you. For those of you who are new to our podcast or new to our faces, probably not many of you, but you never know. We set up the Football Hipsters podcast a long time ago now, probably 2 years ago, I think. We sort of talked about all the relevant leagues across the world each week, and got a bit of a cult following, really enjoyed it. And the only reason we kind of stepped away was commitments, time-wise, work-wise, schedule-wise. It was a bit of a nightmare. So we're very much kind of treating this as a bit of a rebirth and a rebrand, under sort of similar guidelines, but we're just going to kind of scale it back a little bit. No individual segments. It's going to be just a bit of a roundtable podcast. And as for schedule, we're hoping to do sort of once a fortnight to begin with, once a month if needs be, and maybe going back to once a week if we can work things out. So no promises, but if you do enjoy what we give you today, then do let us know. By way of any comments or feedback, we appreciate it. We're working on some new graphics and a new Twitter account as well, so that will come. Right, that's enough nattering for me. Josh, we're going to start with you. A lot of our listeners probably will be based in the UK because that's where we are. The Premier League and the EFL / lower leagues seem to be very differently apart in terms of their thought processes of where football is at the moment. As the guys and Lana was saying, 6 weeks ago, roughly, we had this sort of UK lockdown. A few clubs, namely Arsenal and West Ham, I think, have started some social distance training, whatever that means. The Premier League are going ahead with this. We will be back, sort of rhetoric. EFL is sort of saying, well, we'll see how it goes. I think the Scottish League have put a fork in their leagues as things stand. Where do you sit on what's going on in terms of the English game at the moment?
I mean, it comes to a similar kind of debate we had with VAR coming in. I think it's the same way the FA have kind of dealt with this. I know obviously one of them is a more serious subject than the latter, but you can kind of see how the FA operate compared to even just other leagues. You know, we'll go into the ones that have been more aggressive with their stance of whether or not the league will return. I know UEFA have slowly come back with dates of when they'd like everybody's leagues to change, or at least to finish, of be finalised, and what we'll see from there. But I think the most interesting story I've got at the moment isn't from the Premier League. I think the Premier League, there's so much just hearsay around there. It's difficult to really understand what's going on. The EFL, again, are just a lot quieter than the Premier League, certainly from what I've seen of when they want to return, or even if they will return on that regard, because they've got so many fixtures they need to organise. You know, but at least with the Premier League, it's 20 teams they've got to think about. The EFL has got another 72 that they need, well, 71 they need to look at. I mean, can you remember this is the season where Bury went under? It seems like an absolute world away that was happening to such a club. That's where I think the most interesting story comes in, because we're at 71 clubs at the moment. There is Barrow, who are top of the Vanarama League. And from memory, they've already cancelled that league. If I remember rightly, it just covers because, you know, Kris, you were talking pre-pod that, you know, all like Sunday league or below non-league football has been basically postponed indefinitely at the moment whilst they await stories. But with Barrow, it's been a really interesting story with them anyway. A couple of bigger outlets have covered what's happening down there with Ian Evett, who was part of the Blackpool team that came up with Ian Holloway. If you remember that kind of swashbuckling style of play, that's exactly what he's trying to replicate down there. Or up there, I should say, in Barrow. And they're kind of trying to get that place from Bury because they're 4 points clear at the top of the league at the moment. There is that kind of assumption as like, if you're going to bring football back, you can avoid this season or leave them at these finalised results. Are you going to continue having League Two? It's going to have one fewer club. Or why don't you just vote to bring us back in? And that's probably the most interesting story about it, because as well as promotion relegations, they could say, you know, draw a line in the sand, like people like the Dutch leagues have done, Eredivisie have gone. They're not really thinking of doing promotion relegation for this season, where you've got this case that there is technically a club missing from the hierarchy. What happens there? And I think if anybody is interested in that kind of football and what's going to happen, is that's the story I'd be looking at. I've also been reading about, you know, because where we've seen about staff being furloughed and there's been those questions, it's the lower leagues of where not having these football games is a lot more a pressing issue. You know, whilst the big Premier League clubs and some of the Championship clubs can kind of sustain not having, you know, ticket revenue across, say, this kind of 6-week period, just roughly about the same size as, you know, a general summer or pre-season. It's these clubs that, you know, the gate receipt is what's keeping the lights on the next week after. They've been, I've seen at Barrow have also had, there's over £7,000 of their ticket money that where they were meant to kind of give back to, or they were offering to give back to their supporters, has been donated back to the club to help them fund. So I think it's stories like that as well that just shows how tight things are down in the lower leagues and where they need kind of a swift resolve. And I think it will be on the Premier League mainly to try and finally acquire some of that money that they've got in from TV deals and stuff and filter that further down the English game, because some of these clubs are going to need sustaining. Otherwise, we'll end up with further issues like we saw at the beginning of this season, to be honest, with the likes of Morecambe, Bolton, Bury, I've already mentioned, getting terribly close to going under.
And potentially some of the even quote unquote bigger clubs. You know, that when I say bigger clubs, I mean like sort of Championship clubs. I think there's a lot going on there that people don't necessarily realise. You know, clubs that are of a good size standing, communities that have maybe, shall we say, preemptively put money into their seasons in the hope that they'll go up or hope they'll make the playoffs, etc.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Yeah, that's probably something we will. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I was going to say we've also got Newcastle as well, which is another story bubbling under.
Yes,
which is
we will.
What
We will-
unfortunate time would you have a tax
we will
bill to come up, Mr.
We'll
Ashley?
definitely touch on that one. We'll definitely touch on that one. I want to hop across to Germany next, though, Drew, because there's of all of the big five leagues, quote unquote. We'll come on to what's happened in France in the last 24 hours in a minute, but in Germany, they seem to be, if you read the press, the furthest ahead. Now, obviously, a lot of the English media tend to sort of not really know what's going on in other leagues. They just speculate. Just bring us up to date on how, or what's your understanding of where the Bundesliga is at the moment. There's been pictures of Dortmund back in training. Been following Paderborn's Instagram account. There's a lot of work going on with them at the moment. Where do you sort of see it standing, and do you think that they'll get the governmental sort of green light, if you will, to go back ahead if they wanted to do so?
I don't know if they will or they won't, but that's kind of the last hurdle. It's, whenever Merkel comes on and says, how Germany's going to handle things moving forward will depend on if the league opens or closes. So my understanding of it is simply, it's just kind of almost like a semblance of a return to normalcy. Obviously it'll be behind closed doors. But I think just a lot of people are just kind of looking for some sort of pick-me-up right now, and it's hard to argue that football is one of those things that everyone's kind of looking forward to. Some other clubs have, they're instituting training in smaller groups, 6-8 players. They come in, next wave comes in like an hour later, they train on separate pitches. So they're trying to social distance to at least keep the players fit and ready to go. Obviously, what we've seen with Arsenal as well is a lot of players are training at home. Clubs are buying stationary bikes for players that may not have them at home. They're putting them in their homes, and then they're keeping up with their fitness regimens that way. So that's kind of the situation at the minute. I mean, I'm kind of with everybody else, so I don't think it should start. Personally, I just feel like, as someone who does coach, and something I have to consider even starting in August when I have preseason, is that all it takes is one player that has it in a situation where even if you're social distancing with training and you're training in smaller groups, one player can give it to 6. And then if that happens, all it takes is one case to break out in a league match, despite, being played behind closed doors. That just kind of railroads the whole thing. And I think a lot of Premier League clubs or players are thinking along the same similar lines, that it just takes one case. And then we're to square one. And from a scientific standpoint, a lot of people are expecting this to have a second wave come August or September. So, and that's when a lot of the leagues are trying to get back in for next season, at least, even if they're trying to finish through the summer because there's no Euro. I don't know. I think it's just tricky. But with Germany involved, I think it's just, again, a return to normalcy, but also Bundesliga finances are really dictated by the TV deals. And they don't have the sponsorship that Premier League has, that La Liga has, even Serie A to an extent. So you have smaller clubs who are really struggling. Even Schalke, who are a bigger club, even they're struggling financially because of this. May have potentially railroaded their deal for Tobito. I know there's a lot of interest on their end, but now they might not be able to afford it because they're just not getting the revenue to be able to afford it. And maybe Joel can mention more of that later as well from the Spanish standpoint for the player, but it's tough right now. So you have clubs like, Fortuna Dusseldorf, who might be struggling like a great deal just because of it, or Werder Bremen, who always struggle financially somehow, some way. But I think it's just a little bit difficult. But I don't know, if I had to put my stamp on it, I would say don't go ahead. Just from, I think it's better to be safe than sorry. Kind of what Lana was talking about as well with her personal experience is a prime example. And then, like, I have a lot of friends and family who work in healthcare, and they all know somebody who has it or they themselves have it. So it's just like, I don't think it's something you should be risking with. I think there are other ways to go about it. And I think clubs are doing the best they can, but I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we'll certainly have an open debate in a minute about whether we feel we should go ahead or not. Joel, I'll come to you. As Drew mentioned there, obviously the TV deal is quite a big thing. The Spanish game is also sort of in this kind of shall we not phase. It's been a bit of a weird one, La Liga, because I've heard so much talk about the Barcelona players, about the whole wages dispute, which you feel free to touch on. But it seems like a lot of the other clubs are not getting mentions. Is that just because of the English press, or is that what's happening in Spain as well?
I think the reason the Barcelona players, from a situation with the wage deferral and the sacrifice of the wages to pay for staff stemmed from what we've seen in the last 9 months with what's going on with Barcelona and Bartomeu, the president, and the way he's running the club. There's been a number of occasions this year where Messi has spoken out against, well, Eric Abidal and then the president. And not only when Messi was obviously the captain as a lead representative of the players in this situation, he made a standpoint and an Instagram story post, which is very rare for him to even get an interview out of him, never mind anything like that, where he criticised the board again for basically leaking that the players were not willing to take a pay cut. And what he was saying is, we wanted to do it on our terms to make sure the money goes to where it should go, not to fund the board or not to fund back into the club for other things. We wanted it to go to the people who need it. So I think that narrative has gone on for the last 8 or 9 months. So the more spotlight was on that again, because it was the players versus the board. And this is something you're continually seeing, even to the point of this crazy situation where the board had paid and there's an independent investigation by PwC into this, where the board had paid a social media company to criticize the likes of Messi, PK on Instagram, Twitter, basically to put a mark against their character in effect to boost the board. So this has all gone on. So I think when it came to the deferral and the talks, more was made of it because, again, it was two camps against one another. Now, these type of things have gone on in every single club in Spain to be able to keep the clubs afloat. Players have necessarily taken a pay cut or a deferral until we can get football back. Barcelona independently are financially in a squeeze well before this, really struggling. This has not helped. They will be very forceful to try and get football back. I would think Madrid would be the same. I would think the big clubs would be the same. Javier Tebas, who's the La Liga president, is really pushing for it to come back. And he's basically keeps saying, if they don't come back, this is at a cost of 750 million euros to the clubs in Spain. So again, it's that almost what we're seeing in England. It's that kind of the clubs now pushing the agenda. But interestingly, the Spanish Prime Minister has said from May 4th, the players can go back, train individually. 2 weeks after that, they can go back and train in groups. 2 weeks after that, they can look potentially at coming back to play some games. But from stage 2 of that, what must happen is the players must quarantine. So the players would then leave the families and stay at a base, and only the playing staff and the extra staff, the backroom staff, would all be in one place. And then there's obviously very regular testing. So there's a clear 3-stage plan in Spain to get it back. Clearly, it's going to be behind closed doors, but I think it just follows the same picture as the Premier League and every other league in Europe, basically. Money and the economics of football is dictating this rather than the health of the individuals involved. There was some reports this week that some players within a lot of the big clubs in Spain are not comfortable about going back on May 4th to even do individual training, never mind the next stage, which is to go as part of group training. So it falls into the same category. I mean, nobody's got the right answer. I think everyone's accepted that there won't be a crowd in a football stadium until at least next year now. I think that's clear. But it's just a case of the clubs need it economically. I mean, to take, Barcelona are looking at doing a recruitment drive in the summer for Lautaro Martinez, for Neymar. I can't see, I know we're going to touch on transfers. I can't see that even being possible because allegedly, what you hear is that they make between 15 to 20 million euros per match day. And they make something like 36 million euros every 3 months through the museum. Obviously, none of that's happening. So economically, and that's just Barcelona, like I keep saying, that's going to happen with every other club. So the knock-on is significant. It's not only the broadcast revenues and turnstiles, it's everything else that's attributed to them financially. They're struggling with. So, personally, I don't think it should come back, but I know that the financial side is going to drive this. And I think what we're seeing, particularly in the Premier League, is the clubs now jostling for position, getting players back visibly onto training grounds, pushes the government to make a decision. And I think that's where they've put themselves. They've obviously got together and decided to do this, and it puts pressure on the government to really start to move the Premier League forward. But it's the same for the league as well. The clubs are going to try and drive this forward, but it only takes one player, like Drew said, to get ill, and then how does football look if that happens? It's interesting. It'd be interesting. Do the players get a choice in this? Because there's some might not want to risk getting the virus. Some might not want to be away from the families in this time for 2, 3, 4 months, how long it takes to finish the season. So, do the players get a chance? Do the players have a chance to voice their opinion? And if they refuse to play, are they in breach of their own contract? So that's interesting as well, I think.
How many of your players are actually in Spain as well? I know Matt Ryan, Brighton goalkeeper,
is in Australia.
Yeah, because he went out there for rehab. Same with Son Heung-min is still in South Korea. You've got the same issue in Spain as well, where players
I would think
aren't
so.
in Spain.
I would think that the South American players will have probably gone back home if they could get a flight back during the start of all of this. But it's a good point. I mean, what's the chances of them being able to get back for May the 4th if the training's starting? So that's another problem for them to face, is to try and physically get the players all in one place, and try and get it going from there.
More logistical issues. Lana, let's cover the other 2 leagues that we've missed out, because arguably they've got the 2 biggest stories going on as we speak. Serie A was the first league that essentially, the first country in Italy that had this, the biggest influence in terms of leagues and what went on. We saw Daniele Regani being one of the first footballers to sort of actively say he had the illness. As you mentioned there, Paulo Dybala is now contracted, I think it's 4 times now, which is just madness. And then yesterday we saw the French president essentially say there will be no Liga or Ligue 2 now until at least September. Essentially meaning that they've been very clever in how they've stated this. They haven't said the leagues are over, but they've kind of said they're not coming back. So it's kind of like one of those, we're either going to start a complete fresh season or we'll start again this season in September, whatever that may be. And I think PSG have come out and said they're fully focused now on whatever the Champions League might be, and they've accepted they won't be winning their 74th league title in a row. But that aside, what's your sort of thoughts, particularly on Italy? Because I know that's a league you follow very closely, and Juventus as a club, particularly with those 2 players. What's your thoughts on where France and Italy have gone currently with their situations?
Well, Italy, I think I was surprised at the lack of reporting on how many players were tested positive for it, I suppose. I would have assumed more Atalanta players were tested positive, considering they went to Spain. But majority of the players that have been confirmed to be tested are Juventus players, with Matuidi and Regani both tested and now declared healthy, or whatever I should call it. Dybala got confirmed today for the 4th time in 6 weeks. He also has left the country. I think it's like 10 Juventus players who have left the country. De Ligt left last week. So you have players like Ronaldo, Khedira, Costa, Higuain, all of these abroad. Hopefully Khedira stays abroad and doesn't come back. But the main concern is for Dybala, because we don't know how this will affect him in the long term. There's been some studies on how this could cause damage to the lungs, especially for athletes who have the type of training that they do. And it's a major concern for someone like Dybala, because he's so talented. We always keep talking about he's finally going to reach his peak, which we probably thought that he might have had this season, because he's been so good. And it would be such a shame if this would set him back. I mean, there was scheduled for the league to resume on May 22nd, last I checked, but with the way it's going, with the rate, the death rates going up and not being stabilized, I don't see Italy resuming anything. and let alone the league or the cups for that matter. And I think with France canceling, it was the French prime minister who came out yesterday and said that all sporting activities are effectively put on hold, basically canceled until September, which would be very difficult for this season to finish when you had the next season scheduled to start on August 14th, then postponed to August 21st. So it's difficult to know where to begin, because you have so many different club presidents, Aulas for one, who proposed that you start the league again. You resume the league in September, finish it throughout December, and then follow the calendar year. So you're basically up to speed ahead for the World Cup, which seems very fair and smart if you think of it. Because with it basically canceling the league, Lyon is set to miss out on the Champions League for the first time in 25 years. They might also miss out on the Euro League because...
But Lana, sorry, is the World Cup not the year after?
Isn't it 2022? Yeah. So you would have the next two... you would follow the next two calendar years.
Yeah.
Which is smart because of it's set in the winter time. If I say it's smart, you will have certain Marseille player, a fan coming out to haunt me because now you have UEFA saying you should the club should get the Champions League spots based on coefficient points, which means that Marseille would miss out. But if it's decided based on league standings, which we will know more about in May, when the French Football Federation will decide if there will be a title to give to PSG. Will there be any relegations, promotions? Who will go to the Europa League, because you have Saint-Etienne and Lyon in two cup finals, and that would automatically give you Europa place? Or will you go based on the league standings, which are Nice and Nîmes in 5th and 6th, which gives you Europa place? So there's a lot to consider. How will you do it? You have the transfer window opening up soon as well. How will that come into play when other leagues are technically still active and haven't, been declared void, canceled, postponed? So I'm hoping this is a domino effect that other leagues will follow, because I don't see it being possible for them to, resume this season when you also have to have a break in between, and then you have a preseason. And there's scheduled preseason tours, I assume. And, with the Euros canceled as well. Basically, I don't think football will be coming back anytime soon, whether it's in France or in Italy for that matter.
Yeah.
But is it not?
Sorry,
but I mean, the two leagues that have gone early with this are France and Holland. And I don't know the numbers, but Belgium. It would say to me that the leagues with a lower broadcast revenue are able to do this. So,
the League One is set to miss out on over 400 million euros, which seems like a small amount compared to, say, other big leagues. But I think this could be a blessing in disguise, because this would allow League One clubs to focus more on the academy. If you would come to that situation where you're basically broke and you can't go and shop in the transfer window like a certain Qatari club in Paris would, which could be beneficial to some clubs, like Rennes, Lille, Lyon, who all focus heavily on their academy. So there's positive and negative sides to it. I think the ones who would be negatively affected by this are probably the smaller clubs who you see doing much better. Someone like Strasbourg, Nîmes, who are surprisingly higher up on the table compared to Monaco, Saint-Etienne, who are struggling a lot this season. So
how does that affect? Because you mentioned a couple of lesser clubs there, Lana, in terms of the French league. There's one clubs in Spain. Is it Getafe? Was it Getafe who were riding high
Yeah, yeah.
Sort of a club like that, I think Josh could probably speak about like Sheffield United. Bundesliga wise, I can't think of a team that's outperformed themselves this year. Feel free to jump in, Drew, if there is one. I can't think of one that's really overperformed. But yeah, for a team like Getafe, I mean, when you look at a club like that, or like a Sheffield United, I mean, they've literally had the seasons of their lives. I mean, it's all very well talking about, you know, who's going to win the title, who's going to get relegated. What about a team like that where literally their league position could transform the next 10 years of that club, and that's just gone?
It's I mean, you'd feel that they would be one of the ones that would be pushing for it, wouldn't you? I think clubs in that situation would be the most forceful. Likewise, Atletico Madrid, as it stands at the minute, would be in the Europa League if they finish the season today and award current positions based on league positions. So again, they'll be ones that will probably fancy the chances to get back in the top four and finish in the top four. But it's a real shame for clubs who have massively overachieved, like Getafe. I mean, they had a good season last year and they got in Europa League, but they've gone one better this year and are in the Champions League position as it stands. And there's no to say that they would finish there after 38 games, but you've got to base it on where they're at now, and they've done extremely well up to this point.
Wouldn't they miss out on coefficient points as well at like Atletico Madrid? I think I read that.
I'm not sure on Atletico Madrid, to be honest. I don't know, because they've got, I mean, they had 2 finals in 3 years, didn't they? Champions League finals. That must have given them some points.
And I guess they could argue they're still in the Champions League, quote unquote, as we speak. So I mean, that's the other thing, having out the holders, so that would give them a nudge up the rankings. Well, how does it affect, Drew? How does it affect teams like the superpowers in the Bundesliga? Because Borussia Dortmund obviously are one of the major clubs, as are Bayern Munich. Bayern have been they had quite a few big players out of contract this summer. They've secured Alphonso Davies to a long-term deal recently, but there's a lot of other big name players that they're having to try and negotiate contracts with. I think Dortmund were in the process of sort of a bit of a rebuild. There was some speculation about whether Favre would stay on as well. And then there's other teams in the Bundesliga that, again, were rebuilding this season. Leverkusen were sort of under a bit of a rebuild. How does it affect the team? Leipzig, another one. How does it affect teams like that? I guess Leipzig's a really good example because of how heavily funded they are by a business that, you know, all of a sudden has to look at its overheads.
I mean, they're going to be okay. You know, they're this is the beauty of their business model, is they don't spend a ton of money on incomings. So whereas another club, like, you know, if you were, I don't know, PSG, City, you know, that ilk of clubs that will shell out, you know, stupid sums of money on a player, Leipzig really recruit quite well. They rely on bringing in younger players and developing. So from the spending standpoint, what's going on with COVID won't affect their finances too much. I know that, you know, how the right links obviously with Red Bull might take a little bit of a hit, but they'll be okay. Similarly, you know, Bayern has, you know, people that work for Audi on Bayern's board, so they're also going to be okay, more or less. Dortmund are fine, but you know, the thing about German clubs is they're very, very good at selling players if they need to. But like, for example, with Dortmund, with Jadon Sancho, like, you know, all the speculation about if he's going to leave this summer, and you know, Michal Zorc is adamant that, you know, he can leave if the fee is met. So that's how they'll figure out their finances. But if not, they're still going to be fine. You know, Dortmund is financially a lot better off than where it was 5 years ago. So they'll be okay. But I think the issue is, again, I guess clubs like Paderborn, Werder Bremen, you know, Dusseldorf, those clubs who are currently sitting in relegation. And again, Werder Bremen, you know, a pretty massive club domestically, they're on 18 points. So you guys were talking before about how it affects other clubs, you know, and you were saying how you don't think the status quo will matter at the top, but in Bundesliga it's going to be different lower down. But it also will affect smaller clubs. For example, SC Köln just got back into the Bundesliga, but they're sitting in 10th. You know, if the season is null and void, you know, that's a big kind of hit and miss for them. Union Berlin sits 11th, I think. So same thing. So both those clubs are having good seasons when they've come in, and then now it's going to be kind of a not for nothing thing. But then also, again, this season going null and void would actually help Werder Bremen save relegation. So I don't know, but for the big clubs, again, they'll be fine. I mean, Bayern's the third or fourth richest club on the planet. Dortmund, I think, is top 10. And Leipzig don't spend a ton of money on players. And their financial structure for contracts is still like all German clubs, it's structured incredibly well. Even Bayern don't spend reportedly more than £150,000 a week on players, even like the likes of Robert Lewandowski, for example. So I don't think it's going to have that big of an issue for them or for the teams at the top. But my concern is the other teams who maybe don't have that financial luxury. So
yeah. It makes you wonder about teams like.
Go on.
Mate, I was going to say, makes you wonder about teams like Hamburg and Hanover, two of the big guns who are in the second tier as well. Like they would have been looking at this season as we're coming straight back, and now all of a sudden they may not be. And you wonder how much revenue they would have set aside to have got re-promoted, if you like. It's almost like a team going from the Premier League to the Championship that's a big name, thinking we'll come straight back up, and now all of a sudden they're having to look at it of starting all over again. Potentially, it's quite a weird dichotomy with teams of that stature, I guess.
And what it might force a team like Hamburg to do is to sell a player who maybe they wanted to keep hold of, like Jascha Wagnerman, now might have to be sold this summer, as example, if things don't go through, just to be able to afford certain other aspects. You know, Hamburg usually spends both means, it doesn't really belong in Bundesliga, so you know it's tricky for them. So
yeah,
I think it's the question of what happens with all the kind of existing like transfer dealings that are already out there. Just thinking of on Leipzig with Augustine at Leeds. I think his deal was if they get promoted, they have to buy him for 15 mil. And it's a case of that's 15 mil that you don't know what's going to happen because EFL haven't sorted themselves out. Premier League haven't sorted themselves out.
Yeah.
And I think there's plenty of those kind of loan deals that are around. I was looking through and just thinking which clubs are going to be affected worse from this. If Fulham don't go up to the Premier League, they're screwed because they've got to buy Anthony Knockaert at the end of the season. And the fee that was being offered for him is not one that is going to be generally sustainable. And then what have Fulham got as well to kind of sell in that time? Is it Mitrovic going again? It's going to be really interesting to see what kind of happens. And I think there's so many clubs that are kind of pushing for seasons to be officially concluded, and especially agents and players. And we know how heavily agents now influence the game. I wouldn't be surprised if, Mino Raiola and the rest of them are on the phone to their respective leagues where they've got a lot of players in where they've got to say, we want a solution because I'm going to lose out on millions because, we've got this clause in this player's contract and this deal's going to go through if, this doesn't happen or vice versa. And it's going to be a nightmare from that point of view. And I just wonder what that sees with other clubs, especially like Jadon Sancho. How much is he now worth in a post-COVID-19 transfer window?
The same,
but are you going to get it? Do any of these clubs have the money? Exactly, yeah. That's the problem.
That's a great shout because another example is that Leipzig were 100% interested in bringing Patrick Schick on in a full deal after the season, considering how well he's played on loan. That's going to be railroaded potentially because of the fee that maybe Roma might command, his wages. Also, they might not get the recruitment from the Augustine deal, like you just said. So it's a knock-on effect of a lot of different things. And I think, and Joel's brought it up, and I think we could probably all agree that regardless of the league, whatever Big Five league it is, everyone is heavily dependent on football finances now. I mean, Lana does bring up a good point about, France is a good example about now it might force other clubs to focus on youth production. You already get that in places like the Eredivisie or the Jupiler Pro League or in Germany as well. Clubs, even bigger clubs, still give chances to young players, but we might see more of that in something like the Premier League potentially, which would again suit some clubs and also completely decimate other clubs, depending on which club you're referring to. So, transfers will certainly be tricky, but what I think it might mean is that I don't think we're going to see the transfers that we would have seen this season. I think this summer was shaping up to be a massive summer in terms of the kind of players that were leaving. There was all the speculation about Dybala or Lautaro Martinez. You have Jadon Sancho that people were discussing, like all Timo Werner, all these players who likely or could have at least gone somewhere else. But now, clubs aren't going to want to. Dortmund's not going to sell Jadon Sancho for 40 million. There's no way. So they're going to want to keep a hold of him, and who even knows? So. Yeah, it's a good point there.
I think we might see. Yeah, I think we might see an even greater gap between the big clubs and the small clubs in terms of their financial muscle, because, as you said, there's all these clubs that can probably deal with this or kind of suck up some of it. And when you've got, especially these leagues that are very much like one-team leagues. I know the Premier League has got that at the moment as well. Is what are Liverpool and Man City going to be doing in the transfer window? Are they just going to be scooting up all the players from, teams that can't afford to keep the lights on? Is it going to be another raid of, kind of like a Watford or a West Ham, especially?
Or Norwich as well. People thought, 3 or 4 of their players who big clubs have eyes on, and they might be forced to sell because of the points you've just mentioned. So
yeah. I want to ask you, Josh, and I want to ask. I'll give you Premier League, and I want to speak to Joe about Championship as well before I come back to Lana about something European. Josh, you first in terms of Liverpool. Just briefly, we don't need to go into a huge amount of depth, but there's a lot of very unhappy Liverpool fans out there. Who'd have thought? But after 30 years of not winning the league, they're, if I take off my bias hat for a second, they're quite cheesed off at the fact that there is a growing sense of dread that the one time that everything clicks for them, they're not going to get the title. Something that has really interested me is how quiet Jurgen Klopp's been about all this. You haven't really heard a lot from him, mainly I think because that's kind of his way. He is one of those that he'll speak out about certain things. He won't say anything about other things. Now, where do you sit on let's say the league is called off? Do you feel that as if you were a Liverpool fan, would you feel like it was the title if it was awarded? Like, would you feel like you'd won the league, even though they only needed 2 wins after all? Or will it always have a giant gold asterisk in the background, do you think?
I think probably the way I'd kind of see Liverpool fans taking it upon themselves is the same way Juve fans take upon themselves that title they lost or got taken away from them. You still say 19 on the pitch. They'd bring up the same kind of mantra for their kind of, they've still won the league. It would just drop into the number. They wouldn't say won Premier League, or they'd find a way of bringing it in. And I think that's probably the best way that they deal with it. I'm not sure what Ajax are going to do. I imagine they'll say something similarly, with the Dutch league and how that's gone, that they've not been awarded the title, but they've been awarded first place. It's, you're the champions of this point. But I think, as a Liverpool fan, I'd be rightly apoplectic if we weren't given the league. In terms of their kind of position in the table, I can't think of anyone else across Europe with such a commanding lead in the league. But I think, as you say, with Jurgen Klopp being very quiet on the situation, I think that's one of those, because you don't want to upset anything that will look like you've influenced any decisions. You just keep quiet and it should kind of resolve itself. And I think they all know that in their heads, they've already won the title, haven't they? Really. I don't think anyone can disagree that they weren't the best team in England this season. So I think from that point of view, they just won't have the necessary silverware, which for someone like Sadio Mane, who didn't even know you get a medal for winning the Premier League, I think he'll be fine about. But I think what's going to happen further down the league would be more interesting. In terms of, I think the reason why, and it might seem disrespectful to other leagues to say it, but the table had already taken shape in terms of the big teams were already near the top, the little teams were already near the bottom, so to speak. So when the Dutch league kind of gone, that's fine, we'll write off this league. Ajax were already at the top. PSV were more or less up there as well. I think the only one was Twente were somewhere in mid-table and maybe could have been slightly higher, but because the Premier League is such a not a mess, because it would be disrespectful to the teams like Leicester and Sheffield United, who have great seasons. Wolves, if if Arsenal win that game in hand, they'd be on the same points as Wolves in 6th. So there are some good seasons out there, but when you've got these kind of teams that you would say are the top 6 and not in their natural position, I think that's where they've been a bit more tentative about what they're going to do, because they'll get all those the suits that will come out from this, from Spurs, Arsenal, because they've not been afforded this opportunity. Even Leeds will go into it because if they're not going to relegate anybody and Leeds want to come up, I think that's a really interesting one from the Championship, because you do have 2 teams there that are Premier League quality at the top. I'm not too Yeah,
because I'm coming to that.
yeah. I would like to go into the playoffs as well, but we can go into that.
I think you make an interesting point there as well about the legality side. I believe FC Utrecht are the first club that have filed a lawsuit about the situation in Holland. Be interesting to see where that goes. But I think, from what I can gather, the logistics of that being a lawsuit, I think, to pass a lawsuit like that, I just can't see it holding any weight. But yeah, you mentioned a rather large club there that I want to ask Joel about. Leeds United are sleeping giant, a massive club who seemingly under Bielsa this year had finally got it right. They sort of ridden that crest of a wave. They and West Brom, probably the two outstanding clubs in the Championship. Is there a risk if Leeds don't get really what they were looking for? Radrizzani is quite an outspoken guy. You know, he stated there's a lot at stake here, including even whether Bielsa was to stick around. You know, he might say, "I've had enough." Where do you think that Leeds and West Brom go with this if the league was to be cancelled?
Well, I think from Leeds' perspective, what you hear is that they've absolutely banked on going up this year. They've got, Josh spoke about Fulham with Knockout. Leeds have got the same with Augustin and Helder Costa. So they've got an obligation to buy Helder Costa in the summer. I think it's for 15 million. He's on 60 grand a week. So they've got obligations. Bielsa's the highest paid manager in the Championship by some distance, and probably would be towards the top of the Premier League in terms of what they pay him. I heard on Sky Sports today that they called Radrizzani a wealthy man. I don't think that's the case. I think he's completely gambled with Leeds. I think his plan is, if Leeds get promoted, is to sell. And there's talk of the Qataris buying Leeds, the same ownership as PSG. So I think if Leeds are in a situation where they don't get promoted, financially, it's absolutely financial ruin for them. But I think they would go down the legal angle. And they would be one of the most forceful clubs taking that forward, because it's almost like a bit like Liverpool for Leeds, where they've waited so long to do it, and it's finally, you know, as much as it pains me, it's finally looked like it's going to happen for Leeds. For having to have it taken away at this point would be pretty harsh. There's no precedent though, is there? Because if you look at Scotland, Scottish Premier League is still as it is. They're not deciding that, but Leagues 1, 2 and 3 did the vote, which was contentious, but then they said original placings would stand. So it would have promotion and relegation, whereas the Dutch League has said, no, you know, it's as it is. They're not going to be in the league winners. They're not going to be relegation. So there's no precedent being set anywhere yet, which you can benchmark against to see how it's going to work. But if you're a Leeds fan, I think we've got to give it that there probably was going to go up. And I think if they don't go up, I think it will change the course of the club, because Bielsa will almost certainly leave. I mean, he was almost close to leaving last summer when they didn't go up by the playoffs. There wouldn't be a chance to stick around again. I don't think they could afford to, because he's reportedly on £3 million a year. I mean, to be paying that in the Championship is incredible anyway. And I think the rest of the wages, the likes of Bamford and they've just put Calvin Phillips on a new deal, they're not going to be on anywhere near average Championship wages. They'll be on probably Premier League money as it stands now anyway. So Kiko Casilla is another one. So and same with West Brom. I mean, West Brom had a good go in they got Grzycki from Hull, and they also signed Robinson on loan from Sheffield United. So West Brom had a bit of a go in January as well. So they'll have almost and they held on to likes of Livermore. So they'll have probably budgeted for being in the Premier League next year, and they'll be paying Bilic decent sum. So but West Brom would probably much be the same behind Leeds. Probably not as financially almost ruined as Leeds would be, but I think they won't be far behind in terms of a legal case putting that forward to the EFL if it doesn't go ahead, and if they don't award relegation promotion. But from a Championship perspective, if they finish the season and just call it as it is, I'd be pleased for Hull, because since selling Bone and Grzycki, if you could have written how bad it was going to go, it pretty much went that way. So they were in free fall and probably would have gone down, and that was the feeling. So the season ending at the point it did was massively helpful for Hull. So that's me being biased in that respect, though.
That's all right. I'm sure Bolton fans of the league below are thinking exactly the same.
Yeah. I think they probably would.
There's a few in that boat at the moment.
I want to I want to broaden the debate further. I'll bring Lana in here. Lana, what's your kind of thought process then moving forwards? So, from your perspective, I think you're best suited of all of us to speak about the effects of how this affects families, emotional states, mental states, and how it affects the people around. Where do you sit in terms of the leagues you follow? So particularly with Juventus in Serie A and with Lyon in France, what would you do right now? If you had the power to, God help us, you had the power to make the decision, and you're going to call the leagues off, what would you do? Would you basically null and void the season? Would you say, right, we put a fork in it and we'll pick it up with the same points when we're ready to go? Would you do neither? And how would you structure that? Like, what would be your decision based on it? Because, like you said yourself, it's not just about the sport; it's the whole effect of all the players who might have the disease, who might contract it, the families, the workers at the grounds, everything. What would you do in this situation moving forward?
Oh, that's a difficult one. On one
Sorry, throwing you in there.
You want to basically null and void it. I have no sympathy for Liverpool. Screw them. I hope they don't get it. So to every Liverpool fan listening to this, you can kiss my ass. Anyway, you could start from the start. Just like, go back and, reset the season. It would make the most fair, considering, if I'm being semi-biased, you have Lyon, who's in the Champions League. You have PSG, who just qualified against Dortmund, where everyone, basically myself included, thought they were going to choke like they did last year and the year before. And Lyon are literally 90 minutes away from qualifying and going through to the next round, which is like a lot of money involved as well. How is it fair for them if we cancel, null and void the season, and they're still in a competition which they can get into next season? So, and at the same time, as much as I despise Marseille, it's not fair for them to miss out, or Rennes to miss out, because they've had great seasons. I hope to God Danny mutes this part because Mo cannot hear me say this. So it's like, it won't be fair to anyone, from top to bottom. The only one who will be winners is basically PSG, because they don't care if they don't win the title. They've won so many. They're still going to be in the Champions League next season. They have the money to buy whoever they want. They might be the only ones who won't be, affected by this. If you look at it from all the big leagues, City will, because, they're banned from the Champions League. Will it resume from this season, or will it start a new season next season where they're banned? Because I think the only one who comes out as winners are basically PSG from this. So it's difficult to know what's fair and what's not fair, because what might be fair for one team or one league could be so unfair for the other leagues. So maybe follow what Aula said and finish the season. So, do it from September to December, and then just do it from a calendar year up until the World Cup. It makes sense. It's best suited for everyone, I would assume. I don't know. What's your take on this? You hate Liverpool probably as much as I do, if not more.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say I hate them. Strongly dislike. Hate is reserved for Spurs. But sorry, Gage, if you're listening. But no, I mean, I think there's so much in this whole situation. From day one, my view on this whole thing was, I think when it initially broke out, I think probably like a lot of us, I kind of went, okay, well, that'll blow through. We'll be fine. We'll get past it. It'll be a short-term thing. We'll all be fine. And then obviously the actual sort of lockdown of countries started coming in, particularly when it happens on your doorstep in the UK, and you start to sit up and think about it and go, actually, this is quite nuts. And I think the longer that this has gone on, and the more it has affected people and their families, I think, and people who know around them, the idea of football or sport in general being played right now, to me, is utterly nonsensical in every way, shape or form. the idea that you would have to, like Joel, you were saying, where you'd have to get players, you'd have to come off, go to a base. I think Drew, you touched on it as well, like players having to go to a certain place before they go to training. Like this isn't just something like where there's some dog muck in the middle of the pitch and you've got to play around it. This is something where you literally can have one person contract this and it resets everything. You can have one situation where they're saying, oh, we'll play the games behind closed doors. That you still need to have ambulance crews on standby. You still need to have people who are managing the ticket office on standby. You still need to have stadium safety organizations monitoring games. And not only that, it's all very well saying we're playing games behind closed doors. Let me take you back to PSG Dortmund. Did the PSG fans sort of take that on board and stay at home? No. Atletico Madrid fans came to Liverpool for that game. In their thousands, okay, not their fault. They were advised it was safe to do so. But the idea that you wouldn't get there's a lot of sensible people out there, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of tribal fans and a lot of people who, without being too snotty, are not educated enough to realize that this is very serious. We're seeing this on our doorsteps, in the UK and worldwide, where people are still going out treating it like it's normal. There's a lot going on in America. Drew, you probably would have seen more of this than I would have, where, people are sort of saying, oh, fuck it, we'll just get back to normal. It doesn't affect us. If you throw that into the sporting arena and you start telling people, you got to stay home, you can't come to games, but they still do, and then a player happens to interact, but, either deliberately or not deliberately, and then they pass it through. And it's just, for me, I can't. The Premier League in particular, from our perspective, to me, it's all about money. That's all this can be about. And with the Champions League and the Europa League to a lesser degree, that's all gone very quiet. It's got to be about money. Drew, I'll bring you all in on this one, but Drew, where do you sit? I mean, how is it in the US at the moment? Because I've seen it. Obviously, you've got a slightly controversial gentleman running the country, to say the least. There's a lot of very big states in the US, obviously. There's a lot going on in the US right now. Where is the sort of sporting calendar in the US sitting on this in terms of all the other big franchises?
It's not sitting anywhere. Like, for example, one of my friends, she works for the NBA, and she keeps telling me that the NBA is toiling with building one or two site locations where they can do closed door basketball games, like 4 or 5 a day, and just bring the players in, have it done, and then bring them out. So it's kind of the same thing, but most rational-headed people aren't trying to push for the leagues to start. The NHL is saying that they want to push the season back till December, which the hockey season normally starts the first week of October. So thinking of already pushing it back 2 months, way after quarantine is supposed to be over, just because all the data is coming out that they're expecting another wave of it later on. If you just pay attention to what the scientists are saying, that you have to plan ahead for that. So, like MLB has no plans to start on time. It would have already started. Baseball was already a month old. So you're not going to start a 162-game baseball season 2 months late, 3 months late. That's not possible. So either they push the season longer or they just wait for the next season to begin again. But the thing about American sports franchises is a lot of them are completely fine for money. The way that finances work here, that as opposed to football, it's okay. A lot of players are taking big pay cuts to help out. A lot of the players are helping to pay for the salaries of employees of franchises. A couple basketball players have said that they're going to pay, that they personally will out of their pocket pay for the salaries of any person who does concessions at the arena or whatever kind of thing. So things like that help the community out a lot. But yeah, there's no clamor. Really, there's no clamor to get back. The clamor is coming from the handful of states that I don't have to mention, that I don't personally go to, obviously, for a quote unquote return to life. We'll say that, we'll use Alabama as an example. But other than that, here, for example, I think I've, apart from running errands to the grocery store or the pharmacy or whatever, I think I've left my house 4 times in the last couple of weeks. And it's because if you think about it, like even for me to just leave my apartment, when I leave my apartment, there's potentially 20 people I can run into. To go downstairs 6 floors, there's another 70 people. To go out my front door, there's whoever else. You know, right down the street, there's apartment buildings everywhere that are all 10 stories tall, which have hundreds of people in them, right? And I live in a part of New York City that isn't even heavily populated. I live in like the north part of it, so it's suburby. But if you go like into Manhattan, it's unavoidable that you're going to run into hundreds of thousands of people, or hundreds of people rather. So it's just like there's just no sense in trying to take sports and putting athletes who, you know, have to come into close contact with each other to kind of get things back in motion. And there's a lot of also scientific data coming out that are saying that people are getting reinfected after they pass clear. So even if your athletes are tested and even if they're okay, if they had it, they can still get it again. And if they haven't gotten it, they can still get it, you know? So, and the only sports you can social distance with is like tennis, golf, like things like that, where there's automatic, just by the rules of the game, where there's automatically minimum of 6 feet away from each other. But things like hockey, football, baseball, American football, you know, none of that's possible. So it's really worth the risk. You know, I think it's just, we live in a time period where instant gratification and people want to heavily rely on the things that make them happy. When they don't get it, you know, they start throwing their toys out of the pram to steal an expression from you guys. So it's just frustrating. Yeah, like I'm more.
I was just going to say, and it's funny that you've seen two contact sports, quote unquote, sport, where you've seen like the WWE, for example, are continuing as a apparently an essential business. Nothing to do with the fact that the McMahons are very close to Parliament in the US and have an awful lot of money, and also Dana White wants to continue to run UFC shows, which you would think on the face of it would be absolutely mental, but apparently, you know, that again is going to go ahead. It does beg a belief. You touched on something there, Drew, I want to ask Joel about as well. Joel, there was a story, I don't actually know how genuine this was or whether this was the truth, but didn't La Liga come out with this thing of saying that when the games come back that there would be essentially social distancing in the game and that players touch each other? So like, how does that work at corners? You know, do they change the ball every cycle? Was that true?
I don't know. There's been so much of this. I mean, yesterday on TalkSport, they were talking about it'd be a red card if a player was to spit on the pitch. So you're hearing a lot of this. I mean, a lot of it's hearsay. I mean, to play football with social distancing is just, I mean, it's not football, is it? I mean, it's not physically possible, is it? No. So there are a lot of these stories. I think one thing I wanted to touch on is the Champions League is interesting because UEFA must be in the same situation as a league, basically, where it's got obligations to broadcasters, probably more than an individual league when you think about where they'll sell the rights and to who. If they probably need the Champions League to carry on and the Europa League to carry on, but in the case of PSG, it's a massive disadvantage to them because if they resume it, for example, after the Premier League and Serie A, for example, have come back and played their games, and then they tag how do PSG get remotely match fit to be able to compete in that tournament? I don't understand it.
Nasser Al Khalifa went out and said that they would still play the Champions League despite League One being cancelled. They would go to another country.
But I get that, but but who would they play?
Yeah.
That's
what level?
Good question.
What level? It's going to be a friendly. So they're going to be competing against teams who are playing competitive league football and then playing a game against somebody who's, you know, Paris has been playing friendlies in wherever they choose to play the friendlies. It's just,
who's even going to want to play friendlies with them? Because
exactly,
I mean, imagine social distancing against Messi.
Yeah.
I read that article, like you have to be I don't know how much that is in feet, but 2 meters away. You can't hold anyone during a corner. And I'm like, do you know how many players spit during a game? Basically, you would have to send off the whole team. Imagine socially distancing like against Kylian Mbappe or Neymar or someone like Houssem Aouar. That's impossible.
Messi would get 100 goals a season, wouldn't he? I mean,
I mean, the only advantage I see is for David De Gea.
Would basically just like, you know, break the record for most goals scored by a youngster. So, I mean, but Joel has a point. Like, who would PSG play? because they always blame their competitive level, judging by how low the level is in League One, which they can't do anymore because we've seen, the low teams, as they like to call them, beat PSG. So that shouldn't be an issue for them because they like to, talk a lot, but they rarely walk the talk.
I'm
Except
sure
the
there's
Dortmund
many.
game.
I think with PSG, they've got finances outside of PSG, should we say? I think they would convince other clubs to come and join in with friendlies through some other incentive. But as you say, it's got to, if you want someone who's also match fit, it's going to have to be, is it Arsenal going out there? We've been knocked out of Europe. If Premier League comes back, is it those kind of clubs that you're trying to convince to play a one-off game overseas? Yeah, as you say,
it's still not going to have the intensity of a proper competitive game, is it? Irrespective of whether they pay anybody to go and play there.
And how long does pre-season, Joe? I mean, what you're talking? So, say in La Liga, for example, season finishes in May, and most teams are off June and July, and then they're back in August. Well, we're entering week 7 now, so we're not far off essentially of having a summer off. So, if I was a player or if I was a manager, I'd be very interested to know what Diego Simeone, for example, as a character, would have to say about this. I would be saying to the league, yeah, we'll come back, no problem at all. But we want 2 months pre-season. So that's what until we come back, we want a proper pre-season schedule. We want all of the club staff, the club doctors, everything in place, because this is the bigger thing, particularly when you look at clubs like of the stature of Real Madrid, Barcelona, or, to use Barcelona's moniker, like more than a club. It's not just about what happens on the pitch. It's the whole preparation, the branding, the stadium, the whole thing. If you haven't got everything back in place, you can't just say to the players, right, well, you go off and do your thing. We'll sort the rest out as we go. You need it all in place, don't you?
No, and I think what's also interesting is the plan is if they do bring it back, games will be played every 2 to 3 days. I can't see many clubs being up for that in the sense that, so we're going to bring our players back really quick. Then we're going to play them every 2 or 3 days. The chances of picking up injuries and fatiguing the players is too much. So some clubs who've got an older profile of team will not be up for that one bit whatsoever. I mean, it won't affect some teams who are a lot younger and fitter. I'm not saying that I'm saying all these players are fit, but the chances of getting, but the quality of the football is going to diminish as well as the products, because the players are not going to be as fit if they are playing every 2 or 3 days. It's not going to be possible.
And what if a high-profile player? I'll ask you this one, Josh. What if a high-profile player, let's say someone like, I don't know, Neymar, comes out and says, "I'm not playing." Well, we've seen sort of Mesut Ozil, for example, the past week. There's been a lot of controversy about him, saying that he doesn't want to necessarily take a pay cut. And now, when you scratch below the surface of this, it's not just him saying, "I'm greedy footballer, F you." It's essentially a player actually having a sensible point of view and going, I'm not ready to defer my wages until I know when I'm actually coming back. And B, why? Like, surely the players have got a say. Surely these high profile players have got a right to turn around and say, well, no, we're not coming back yet. Like, we have got a lot of these young players have got young families or have got elderly relatives. Like, surely it's going to take just one big player to come out and say, nah, not doing it. And then other players are going to, quite rightfully, like the Ozil deferment of wages situation, start looking at their own situations and going, actually, I kind of want to know what the future is going to be before I commit to coming back to training or playing. Yeah,
I mean, the only reason the Premier League kind of finished, or at least postponed, was purely down because a manager got coronavirus. The Premier League was still trying to pursue games. The French League had shut down. I think the Liga had shut down. Serie A had obviously shut down weeks beforehand as kind of the European epicenter of the whole thing. But yeah, Premier League was still trying to push on, still trying to get games played. And it's just so odd that they kind of want to, well, we've kind of discussed why they want to bring people back in as soon as possible, because they've got these huge television deals that they want to kind of push through and make sure that they're kind of fulfilled from their point of view. But I can't see them trying to bring it back and without there being either some kind of cure for it, a vaccine, or anything previous. Because as you say, just any player who gets it, the whole thing falls down again. You know,
Reset,
it was like it was like Bundesliga trying to bring it back as well. And so they were all like, "Oh yeah, we've got all this great plan," and then someone else gets it, and they're like, "We've got this great plan," and no one's kind of thought further through because they know the answer to that already. Which it isn't just this is just an open-ended question. It is you have to stop playing again, and that's up and down the leagues because especially if say La Liga come back and they play 2 or 3 games a day. And you're not showing symptoms for 7 days, you've been in 3 different places in the country, potentially, with 3 different groups of players and backroom staff. You've spread that definitely across the region. And these players have still got to go out, and it's just going to be so.
But the thing is, Josh, what you'll also have then is that then you've got to postpone the fixtures because you're going to have to then quarantine that team on the team that they've played. So you're going to have the fixtures are going to be scheduled, but then they're going to be cancelled midway through this rearranged season because you're having to quarantine players. Yeah,
it's like playing FA Cup fixtures after the draw's been done, and even after certain rounds have finished, you're into the next round, and you've got a replay occurring. Afterwards, it just throws the competition out of whack. Are you playing, especially because it's like the team you've got available and those players that are available, are they still available at that point? Because we've gone through things like transfer windows.
Well, the Premier League came out, didn't they, and said that they were going to extend the registration list from 25 to a 29-man squad. And the viewpoint, although they didn't actually say this, but reading between the lines, what they're essentially saying is you could afford to have 3 or 4 players who, quote unquote, have got it or got the symptoms because we're extending it so you can bring in these other 4 players. Now, speaking from an Arsenal perspective, so what you're basically saying is, say, for example, Aubameyang, Leno, David Luiz, and I can't think of an influential midfielder, fill in the blanks here. They've all got it, so they're all quarantined. That's fine. Don't worry, though, because you can bring in that lad who scrubs the boots. You can bring in that guy who made the tea, who's on a 4-year scholarship. You can bring in Pablo Mari, who hasn't had a game for us yet, and you can bring on Cedric Suarez, who's got half a leg. That's not a fair playing field when you're playing Man City's first team, who nobody's got it, and they're all fine.
Yeah,
and then you've got another legal issue.
You could say that's the case of any injury crisis, though. That if you've got any player that we've, especially as Arsenal fans, all teams have injury crises at some point and come up against a fully, a team at full strength. But I think where we're looking at it is that there is a cure for a broken leg, and that all these things have been sustained generally through playing the sport,
the game.
I think the things like coronavirus is it's completely preventable. From this point of view, of just by being sensible and not necessarily having to bring them players back. And with the Premier League adding an extra 3 slots, well, teams are already down to the 25 players. The rest is made up with youth signings or youth players, anyone under the age of 21. So are they then saying, you can sign some more players because they're going to open the transfer window up? Or is this some unregistered players that you've got elsewhere that are on loan somewhere, like say Serie A void? Does that mean we get Mkhitaryan back from an Arsenal perspective, who was on loan there? It's not in our squad anymore. Is that the way they're looking at it? That you then recall players from loan?
Can we bring Saliba in, who's always an Arsenal player and the league has finished? So can we bring him in now? Yeah, exactly.
But then will Italy, well, to be fair, saying players coming back into England at the moment with how we're screening people coming in from foreign lands at the moment for Corona is maybe not the thing, but can we get, will they even allow, say, Mkhitaryan back into the country because he's been in lockdown in Italy for however long? And that also, as we kind of mentioned towards the beginning, there are players that went to see their families who aren't here, and we've got to get them back as well. And who knows what kind of condition they're in as well.
What about the players whose contract runs out on, is it June 31st?
Yeah, June 30th. June 30th. So
what do you do about that?
month extension is the talk, isn't it? But again,
But then,
if you're a player like, I mean, Cedric Suarez is the one that we've all discussed at Arsenal. If you're essentially, you joined a club through an agent with the view to joining permanently, but he hasn't played a game for us, there's almost a way out for both players and the clubs, because arguably, like you were talking about the earlier issue with Leeds having stipulations to buy players, etc. What about those players where they've gone to a club on loan and it hasn't really worked out for them? Can the clubs now just go, oh, actually, well, we don't fancy you anymore? And the player turns around and goes, well, hang on a minute. I was shit for 4 months, but I technically had 2 months of the season left. I might have been absolutely lights out and scored 15 goals. And the club turns around and goes, well, there's no sign of it. But the player goes, yeah, but you don't know that. Can they? There's nothing been written into these players' contracts of previously to state how they get around that. And you've got to think that now contract law and transfers is going to change massively. Surely, are we finally going to see the bottom of the transfer market fall out as a result of this? What do you think to that, Lana? I'll ask Drew on this one as well in a second. What do you think on that, Lana? Do you think the transfer window changes as a result of all of this?
Oh yeah, immensely. I only, just the fact that you mentioned that the contract which expires now would be extended. Say someone like, whose contract is expiring now? A good player, someone like Pjanic, who expires on the 30th. You extend it a month, and he gets injured. Season, ending injury. Who is going to sign him? Because he's a free agent. Would a player want to risk that? I wouldn't personally. If I know that I could, cherry pick whoever I want. I know that I'm wanted by Bayern Munich, by Barcelona, City, United, and I could risk during those 4 weeks to, get an injury or whatever, and I risk on missing out on signing for a big club, and I'm, clubless. Would a player want to risk that? Because, as you said, there's nothing in their contract protecting them. By definition, during a situation like this, you have no protection whatsoever. There's no insurance for it because it's nothing we've been through before.
It's also who wants to be bringing on new wages at this time.
Yeah.
Who wants to sign new players?
There's also a point. You use Mkhitaryan as an example. So he's probably out the door at Arsenal. He's on loan to June, so he'll be on loan to whenever in June. But if Roma send him back, Arsenal have probably budgeted for him to have gone by, I don't know, the 5th of July. They've now got that incurred cost of his wages. And I guess Arsenal can suck it up. But if you take the lower leagues, for example, if you've got somebody in League One who's on $6,000 a week and you've budgeted from the 1st of July, you'll have him off your wage bill, but you actually need him for the remainder of this season. You've now got to find, because you might be replacing him with a player on $2,000 a week. So you've got to find $4,000 a week for a player that you thought you was getting rid of on June the 30th, but you've now got to extend his contract. The bigger clubs can suck that up, maybe. I mean, Arsenal probably pay Mkhitaryan, $150 a week. So that's as an example. But I mean, lower down the leagues, that's an added headache just to say extend the contract. I don't think it's just quite as easy as that for clubs in the lower leagues at all, just to extend the contracts.
I think when we're discussing with Leeds, we can do a great one with Ben White, who's on loan from Brighton. Is absolutely key to everything that happens with that side. One of the reasons they're up so high is because he's been the mainstay of that defence. They got a budget for him to be playing for Leeds in August, and then kind of football comes back, and then the same thing happens again. We go back into lockdown, and then they end up voiding the league. That's, a good couple of grand that they easily didn't need to have been spending because of just the umming and ahhing of how do we bring it back?
Yeah. What's your take on transfer side of things, Drew, as well? Like you mentioned about the Jadon Sancho deal is the big one that's being talked about. There's also a lot of sort of talk about Timo Werner potentially interesting Liverpool. The other one that I was really fascinated by is Upamecano, who has been long since linked with Arsenal and Premier League clubs. His value, is that going to decrease? You mentioned like the big clubs, it's not a big issue, but do you see transfer fees changing? Because German clubs are notoriously quite business is very different there, isn't it? You see players move between Dortmund and Bayern, for example. It's not like it is in the Premier League where clubs won't sell to each other. Do you think there'll be more of an emphasis, like we're saying to Lana, about the youth players coming through in German clubs now? Do you think the transfer window will change? Because Germany is always a country that is notoriously, very well managed, very sensible in how they do things.
I mean, you can't focus any harder on youth players than you already do in Germany anyway. So that fact won't change. It's just going to persist. Like an example, Joshua Zirkzee at Bayern Munich is a prime example. He's come through. He's gotten a lot of time even before all of this. He was breaking through. So it's just one example that a club of Bayern stature can still bring through younger players that are quite good. And you have that running down the entirety of the league. Even smaller clubs will have at least one or two players every year, younger players that will see time. So, and a lot of them also buy young and develop. You don't, and they either buy young and develop, or a lot of them will bring in maybe one older players on 1 or 2 year deals just to kind of solidify the squad. So squads are getting younger and younger. And if I remember right, I think the Bundesliga has the second lowest average age group and per club, other than ABW of the top 7 leagues. I can't remember, but so that won't change. And regarding transfer deals, though, I mean, I think you'll see clubs maybe talk to the players and say, "Look, I know you want to leave this year, but can you kind of hold on for 1 more year? So, we'll allow you to leave, but we want to make sure we get fair compensation." Upamecano is a prime example. The other day, you had builders saying that they came to terms with Bayern. It's just the clubs have to hash out the fee. And now they're saying that he might stay 1 more year. Sportbill saying he might stay on 1 more year, or 1 year extension. That's clearly Leipzig putting that in on the table for him, saying you get another year of Champions League, you get another crack at winning the Bundesliga, and then we'll let you go, but for a value that we deem acceptable because we're not going to get it this summer. Bayern's not going to want to pay 60 million. They can, but they're not going to want to, and they're going to use this sort of epidemic as the reason. Timo Werner is another prime example of that. Jadon Sancho, we already mentioned all of that. So I think it will affect the bigger players in terms of how clubs will handle that. But the other deals, business as usual. There's a lot of transfers for £5 million there, £6 million there, €8 million, whatever have you. So that I don't think will much change, even with bigger clubs. But for the bigger name players, I think you might see something very different just this summer. I think if things go back to normal for next season, I think it'll be kind of business as usual in that regard. But I don't think we're going to see the moves that we thought. And I think I can kind of see the clubs. I can see their standpoint of it. Why do I want to miss out on 120 million pounds for Sancho this summer because of this? Why would I sell? And also why would he leave as well? So considering the circumstances, it's just this year. So I think across everything else, I think it'll remain. It'll be okay, but just bar the summer though.
Yeah, time will tell. We are going to wrap up in a moment. Just before we do, I do want to give everyone an opportunity just to bring up sort of anything else that they might want to mention. Josh, I know you need to leave pretty immediately, so I'm just going to give you the last word before I go to the other guys. I just want to get your thoughts on the Newcastle takeover. We touched on it earlier on. Where does it sit with you? Are you comfortable with it? Are you not comfortable with it? Saudi backing, questionable human rights, etc., and so on.
I mean, in terms of kind of the Newcastle in general, I think the fan base will be delighted that Mike Ashley is out of the club. In terms of his finances at the moment, he's got a massive tax bill that he's got to pay, plus the fact that, he's in the high street. The high street is currently closed. He's got a lot of overheads he needs to get rid. So it makes sense that this deal's happening at this point. He needs £300 million from somewhere, so he's got to kind of get rid of one of his assets. In terms of Saudis coming in, I think it's one of those where I saw everything kind of coming through was from a lot of Qatari people raising flags against this. And I know there's a lot of tension between the two countries. And I wondered if that was more of where we were seeing this about moral issues between them. Because, the Qatari World Cup is not the squeakiest of clean World Cups we've ever seen in terms of human rights issues. So I'm not going to say that it's just because we've got one, we shouldn't have the other. I think we shouldn't have either, really, because they've both got deplorable records. But there's also not many squeaky clean billionaires out there. should we say. There's not many people that you can go through the clubs and say, right, yeah, they're fine. They're a decent person. But I think in terms of the Saudi thing, I think there's a bit more to it from kind of political reasons of them throwing it up, because we've got Qatari-owned clubs within the Premier League and further down as well. And I think that's more where that rivalries come in rather than anything else. But yeah, I will be surprised to see what kind of happens from that point of view in terms of managers that they want to get in as well. I'm not sure Steve Bruce has got much time left there, to be honest. I think he's done an okay job at Newcastle. He's got some good wins, marquee wins while he was there. But, talks of Rafa coming back or even Pochettino coming in. I'm not sure. He's Well, Pardew, he's just officially...
He's just walked away, isn't he, again?
He's just walked away after getting Ten Hag free from relegation, thanks to COVID-19. But, yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with that project, and I'm happy for Newcastle fans because I think at this point they're so sick and tired of Mike Ashley, they don't care where the money comes from.
No.
To be honest, it could be the dirtiest money you've ever seen, but because of the fact that Mike Ashley is gone, if they do great things for Newcastle and the community get what they kind of want in terms of what they want to see on the pitch, I think a lot of that kind of things will get swept under the carpet, unfortunately. But that's generally what happens with football, is you see all of these things, you say, oh, that person's, really awful and terrible things, but they still get these kind of lifelines. And I think that's where we'll kind of see it kind of happen. Yeah. But yes, I do need to shoot as well.
Yeah, no worries.
It has been great to be back, and I'm sure I'll catch the last 15 minutes or so on the podcast when it finally comes out.
Indeed. Yeah, thank you for coming on, Josh. Yeah, we'll reconvene, same bat channel, same bat time, same bat place, etc. and so on. But yeah, thank you for being part of the relaunch. And yes, into the night with you. Enjoy your Zoom quiz.
Yes, thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Right, so final thoughts from the rest of you guys. Lana, anything else that you want to sort of wrap up from your perspective? Anything else you want to highlight, or anything else that's caught your eye during this really weird time?
Oh, I forgot to mention Montpellier's midfielder, Junior Zambia. He's in a coma.
Indeed. Yeah,
because of the coronavirus.
And he's a young player, isn't he? He's a very young lad.
I think he's like 21. No, maybe I'm missing something like that.
I'll double check. Yeah, I'll double check that. Carry on.
I think this coronavirus has messed with my memory as well, because I can't remember things.
I think that's just old age.
I miss football so much. The last game I saw was Lyon beating Juventus. That's literally the last game I saw. And I recorded it, so I'm going to watch it again tonight. Not much. Some transfer news. Awar is wanted by Barcelona, and Juventus, and City. No surprise there. Dembele will leave this transfer window, or upcoming transfer window. And he's also wanted by both Barcelona and Juventus. So that should be interesting. He needs to leave if he wants a shot at the World Cup, at the Euro squad next summer. Which is also good that it's been postponed for someone like, Dembele, Depay, who were both set to miss out this summer. So they must, be thrilled. Lyon are in contract extension, looking to extend Depay's contract. Buffon and Chiellini will extend to next year. Buffon is hell-bent on outliving us all, and then will not leave. There's talks about a Pogba Pjanic swap with United, unless Zidane gets his way. For some reason, Madrid don't want Pogba, but Zidane does. That should be interesting. Roma wants some TT, as well as Arsenal. So maybe we will finally reunite the two best friends at Arsenal. Please do that.
Otherwise, Laka walks out and TT walks in, knowing Arsenal. But yeah, go on.
Yeah, that would be so heartbreaking. I would literally start a petition. I also remembered that Deschamps extended his contract to next year, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Which could be that he, he might not go on to coach France for the World Cup. If there isn't even will be a Euro next summer, with the way things are going. The women's tournament was also postponed, if I wasn't mistaken. I think I read that. It was postponed to 2022, which is really good, because they deserve all the exposure they can get. I was really angry that the men and women were going to be the same summer, but it makes sense to move it to 2022. They deserve all the exposure. We see that women's football is finally on the rise after a successful World Cup. So I hopefully will finally see Ada Hegerberg back in a Norway shirt if she doesn't continue her strike. Knowing Norway, they probably won't want her back either. So we'll see about that. I don't think. Do we have anything else to cover in France?
No, I think like you said, I think Junior Sambi, by the way, 23, which is quite scary when you think about it. He's in induced coma at that age when apparently there was no risk to quote unquote sort of younger people that weren't children. Well, that's gone out the window, hasn't it? Appreciate there's other things going on and things we might not know, different medical conditions, etc. But that's quite a scary thought. But no, I don't think there's anything else really that's gone on. Say the big news about France yesterday.
Shout out to him. I know he's not a big. We don't like him, but he cut 40% of his wages, and he is also paying the wages for all the staff at Monaco, which is huge. He has his own family, a lot of kids. He has things he has to focus on, but I think it's a really nice gesture. And he might not be my biggest, I'm not his biggest fan, but it was really nice to read that. And to see just how nice it is for footballers to step up during this time, especially, when clubs are struggling from top to bottom. So it's nice to read that. Hopefully more players will follow through with that. I know a lot of the clubs have cut their wages. Not everyone, but most of them have to help the club. So, I don't think PSG have, but well, they can afford it. So
surprise. And also, same question to you, Drew, and sort of anything else that you want to bring up and touch upon it. And just while I've got you, I think, was it Joshua Kimmich, Robert Lewandowski, and there was another one, wasn't there? Bayern, there was three or four players who got a huge amount of money to charity. Sort of originally when all this came out, I can't remember who the third player was, but that was quite a nice thing to mention. But anything else that you want to mention at all?
No, I'm just happy I can stop hearing Arsenal fans talk about that we're going to get Makano this summer. That's kind of my takeaway of everything, so I can now rest easy and not be stressed anymore.
True.
Nothing really much. Just I think the one thing, I'll disagree with it, but even if Bundesliga does start back up, despite my disagreement of it, I think it's a really good promotion for the fact that, for me, I think it's the best league in Europe at the moment. So it'll at least give people the ability to watch more of it and gain a better appreciation for it, because I still think it's very underserved in the community. I think everyone is still on the Premier League and La Liga trend, and even with Serie A's rebirth a little bit, I think more and more people are watching Italian football again, which is great, because when I was a kid, that's all everyone ever talked about was Juventus and Inter and whatnot. So probably just that. I mean, despite my issues with it, I think it would be nice to see football again, especially for a league that I appreciate so much. So no, there's really nothing else other than that, I suppose.
I have a question. What is your club's issue with Tolisso? Why do you want to sell him?
Well, Drew's not even a Bayern fan, but
he's your league's issue. Well, he's like Bayern's record signing, but apparently, he's wanted by a lot of clubs now in Europe. I think Barcelona was one of them. Apparently, Barcelona wants everyone.
He's just not really settling under Hansi Flick than other players are. I think it's just kind of that simple. And even though Bayern are financially quite strong, mean, that's money off the wage bill. You know, it allows them to extend younger players that they're trying to block up for. As you know, Alphonso Davies signed a long-term deal, but there is Joshua Zirkzee they need to consider. There's a couple others. Oliver Batista-Meyer, they don't have to worry about locking in for a long time. If they do have to go after Upamecano, then they're going to want the wages for that back. Like there's a few things. I just feel like it's a combination of the finances a little bit in terms of wages, and also the fact that he's just not playing well under foot that other players are. And he's the type of player who he's still young enough. If he leaves Bayern, he can just reestablish himself at another club of stature and still kick on his career quite well.
Because he's so extremely
for him,
versatile. Like he
he
would
is.
fit in literally in every midfield in Europe.
Yeah,
by
he
his
would.
side.
So I don't think leaving would be an issue for him. And I think both parties would be fine with it. I think Bayern have enough depth at midfield, especially with the way things have been rejiggled now. You know, you have Benjamin Pavard playing right back. So
Yeah, he's been amazing.
And Joshua Kimmich, who was actually a midfielder when he was younger before he became a right back, is now back in midfield for Bayern and playing quite well. Despite the other options that they have, you know, Thiago is still there, you know, Leon Goretzka is still there. So you still have all these type of players. They're looking at Kai Havertz, which is another big thing. If they brought him in, you know, where's the room for
Isn't
Tolisso kind of thing?
Coutinho there as well?
Yeah, but I think he's going to leave. I would be shocked if he stayed past this season.
He's
well,
on
depending-
loan, isn't he? Is he on loan?
Yeah, it's a loan. Yeah,
Or
so
did
he's
he
going
I
go
forgot
for
he
it?
existed.
Yeah.
So is he?
It's easy to forget that he existed. So, yeah, no, again, but Bayern have options. So if they lost him, I don't think it's a big deal. But not for nothing, I would take him at Arsenal. And not that he would come to Arsenal, but I think he's a player of immense quality, and I still think that he has a lot to give. It just hasn't worked out under the manager, and we've seen that with other players before. Sometimes it just doesn't click for you. It has nothing to do with
I
him.
welcome my arms in Turin for him. I should be in charge of Turin, you know, of Juventus
To
scouting
replace
system.
Douglas Costa. Yeah.
I would
yeah,
bring
so
in like
it's
Tolisso, Dembele, Lacazette, Umtiti, who else?
basically all the French
Awad.
players. Yeah.
Basically all the Leon.
Basically the
Yeah,
entire Leon
especially
squad.
Umtiti. I would
And
save
then-
Umtiti from that hellhole he's stuck at. No offense, Joel. You're not allowed an opinion on this because we both know you like Longley more. Which is yeah, that's another debate because Joel and I are just now becoming friends again after our heated debate on that pairing.
I think with
Well, now-
Umtiti,
now
what is interesting with Umtiti is there is this theory that Valverde didn't fancy him, which could have
Racism.
been, which could have been plausible in some respect that a manager didn't fancy a player. But now Setyen's come in and pretty much done the same. I think that says Umtiti's
But he's
days.
played games though.
Yeah, but not very well. So I think there's just
And
a theory
through
You
Exactly.
that I
wanted him
think
to
it-
miss out on a World Cup. A World Cup he sent us to the final. Just like FYI. His goal against Belgium, we went to the final and won. You wanted him to miss out because of a stupid surgery. Like, who do you think you are?
But
How can you
I-
demand such thing? It's like
I
basically
think-
telling Messi to sit down this World Cup where he potentially could win Argentina the World Cup to have a surgery. Do you think Messi would listen? No.
But I
Basically,
think
You
with
ruined the
playing neutral.
best defender.
But I think with Umtiti I just think there must be something that they're seeing or not seeing that is forcing them to. Maybe the injuries caught up with him. I don't know. I did think when Setien came in that Setien did come in, and the first thing he did was put Umtiti in, which everyone kind of sat back and went, "Oh, maybe there was something in that." And then 2 or 3 games later, he was out again. Longley played nearly every game since. So, what's interesting with the market, just to finish on it, I think what we're going to see is a lot of player trading. I think we'll see a lot of swaps or player plus cash. I think that's the way clubs will get around the shortfall in revenue and transfer budgets. I've seen Barcelona have agreed terms with Lautaro Martinez, and now are trying to do a deal where they send Carlos Elena and Vidal as part of the deal. And I think we'll see a lot more of that across Europe, where the big clubs will still buy players. I just think they'll have to be careful about how they do it and how they structure the deal. And I think player swaps as part of the deal might be the way that they go. I think that's the only way the clubs can finance the deals, because we're still going to see massive transfers this summer, but I think 1 or 2, not 20 or 30, which we probably would have seen. So I still think that's
Will
a
we finally
possibility.
get Neymar?
See, the Neymar one is a really strange one because I think they were all set to do it this summer, but I think this has scuppered it slightly. But the massive but to it is they've promised Messi that they'll get him back, and they promised him last summer, and then they went and signed Griezmann instead. And I don't think they can go
Sounds like
against
a
Messi
kindergarten.
against almost, but he's never. I mean, Neymar's never been the same without Messi, and Messi has done well without Neymar, but he's better with Neymar in the team. And I think it's his friend. I think he wants him back. So if they don't sign Neymar, I think it puts them in a really strange position with Messi that they've let him, almost in inverted commas, let him down for 2 summers running. I mean, the decision to sign Griezmann over Neymar was odd, but then they kind of made it look an attempt like we're going to sign Griezmann and Neymar, when really they didn't have the money to sign Neymar. So if they just said we'll just sign Griezmann and that's it, I think it would have been a bit more palatable than con everybody that they were going to sign Neymar for the full summer and then get to the last days of the window and say, oh, we can't do a deal, he can't get him out of Paris. I don't think there was ever the finance in place to get him. But I think I do think that will happen this summer. I do. I just think they'll find a way to do it. Maybe use Dembele as part of the deal or Griezmann as part of the deal.
Yeah, Griezmann for me, that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I just think he's done all right, I think, but it's just not. He's not what they needed. He's a great player, but he was not. I mean, sometimes a great player doesn't fit a team. And don't get me wrong, if he stays, I think he's good for the club. He's good for the team. But I just think it just was the wrong fit for what they needed. They needed Neymar. They needed a left winger with pace, and they went and signed a player who kind of is pushed out to the left, not the quickest, but he's a great player. But you know, maybe Suarez will go, but obviously Lautaro Martinez is still the one they want as well. So I think we'll see Martinez arrive and Neymar arrive, and they're looking at Tonali. I don't know much about Tonali from Brescia.
He's a huge talent.
He's been linked heavily the last 3 or 4 days. But Lana, you named a lot of players they're looking at there, but I think agents just throw Barcelona out there to drum up interest because they've not got that much money to be signing every player. That you see different name linked every day, and you think there can't be anything in that, because they just link with so many players. But it'll be an interesting summer. I think they're going to have to be creative. I think all the top clubs have to be creative in the way they have to trade.
Yeah. I think it's going to be a very interesting. We say summer. I mean, as I say, we're a couple of days off being in May now, so you know, all of a sudden things have come around very quickly. Just to give our listeners a bit of insight, obviously you did at the start of the pod as to the future. Essentially, what we're going to do with our schedule, like we mentioned earlier on, is kind of look at one a fortnight initially. But what we're also going to do, this will depend upon my fellow panelists, of course, but because there's just so much to discuss and there's so many things change day by day, I will sort of open the possibility up of doing sort of one-on-one pods. So at some point, if you dear listener, would like to hear more from us, obviously please do let us know. But at some point, I will plan to do some individual pods with all the individual crew. So sort of me with one other, and we'll just talk about the individual leagues or just kind of shoot the breeze, basically. So look out for those. As I said, initially at the moment, we're kind of working on a schedule of we're back, but we're still rebuilding and we're still kind of refreshing things. So like I said at the start, we will be setting up a couple of social media accounts. We can keep in touch with us. We'll be all being well on the usual platforms. So I think if you listen on Apple Podcasts, on Acast, I think we'll be going on YouTube. So all of the usual spots. And I do just want to give a little shout out to Gage Reynolds. Gage was a former, I keep saying former. This is terrible, isn't it? They're not former friends, they're current friends. But Gage was a listener to our original Hipsters podcast back in the day. And as a result, he went away and said, I want to do a bit of that. And he started up his own podcast. So fair play to you, Gage. I was a guest on it. It's called The Slapcast, at The Slap Podcast on Twitter. They generally sort of cover the Premier League because they've got fans of Spurs, Leicester, Arsenal and Palace, hence the sort of slap analogy. Really good crew. They're all based in the US. Really enjoyable time I had on their podcast as well. So a little bit of shout out to Gage and his crew for essentially listening to us and going, I'd like to do that. quite humbling to have somebody to do that. And we plan to get Gage and the crew on this pod at some point in the future as well. So look out for that. But as usual, if there is anything that you particularly want us to cover, it's a weird time for us all. I think we're all kind of, as Drew touched on, and Lana as well, I think we all have good days and bad days at the moment. And as everybody has said, whatever country you're listening to this in, please adhere to the rules and make sure that you keep yourself safe and sane as best you can. Keep the exercise in and everything, but just keep yourselves indoors as much as you can. And hopefully we can bring you a little bit of content to keep you ticking over. So please look out for that. But I will draw our return episode to a close there. Just want to say thank you very, very much to Drew, to Lana, and to Joel, and of course Josh, who's no longer with us. That sounds even worse, doesn't it? Sorry, Josh. But yeah, thank you very much to everybody for coming on. So thank you very much to you, Drew. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you, Lana.
Thank you.
She's still there. Thank God for that. And thank you, Joel.
Cheers, Kris. Thanks, guys.
All right. Well, all the best to you. Thank you very much for tuning in. Hopefully, you've missed us enough to listen to this all the way through to the end. Thank you to the man in the background. You know who you are. But until next time, keep your beard strong and your glasses trendy. Remember that? We do. We'll speak to you very soon. Thanks for now.